Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I'm really excited you're here with us today, because we're about to go on this incredibly profound journey right into the origins of human dignity. We're going to unpack a concept that has literally shaped philosophy, ethics, and theology for thousands of years. It's called the Imago Dei, or as you probably know it, the image of God.
Okay, let's just dive right into this. What does it actually mean to be made in the image of God? I mean, is it about how we look, how we think, maybe how we act? It's kind of a wild concept when you stop to think about it. And honestly, this central mystery has totally puzzled brilliant scholars, ancient philosophers, and everyday thinkers for centuries. So today, we're going to unpack the source material and find out exactly how this ancient blueprint was formed, and, more importantly, how it's still shaping our world today.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the Genesis blueprint, then look at Adam versus Christ. After that, we'll cover creation to incarnation, trace some historical interpretations, and finally wrap up with the basis for human rights.
All right, Section 1, the Genesis Blueprint.
So to really get this, we have to look at the foundational text from Genesis, the one that actually gave humanity this unique status. The whole idea stems from two key Hebrew words, tselem, which means image, and demut, meaning likeness. Now, scholars point out that tselem implies this deep kinship relationship. It essentially positions humanity as God's representative heir on earth. Demut, on the other hand, suggests a similarity in character or quality, and the source material has this absolutely fascinating metaphor for it. Early thinkers kind of viewed a human being as God's living statue, placed right square in the middle of a cosmic temple. Think about that. You're literally the representative of the divine in the physical world.
But here's the thing. This wasn't just some passive status meant for sitting around and looking important. The mandate given was crystal clear. Humanity had a directive to rule over the fish, the birds, the animals. Essentially, these early texts gave humans a functional role. It wasn't really about having, specific physical traits or some glowing mystical aura. It was about acting as God's vice-regents. We were meant to be stewards, entrusted with real authority over creation.
Moving on to Section 2, Adam versus Christ.
Now, what's really interesting here is that as theology developed, a pretty deep tension started to emerge. We see a huge emphasis placed on the intense contrast between the very first human and Jesus Christ. Think about the first Adam. He's the prototype, right? But he fell into sin. And that event severely corrupted, but crucially, it did not completely destroy the image of God in humanity. Then we have what's called the second Adam, which is Christ. According to early church fathers like Irenaeus, Adam's epic failure required a flawless recapitulation. Basically, Christ had to live in perfect obedience to ultimately realize and restore that corrupted image. It is, for all intents and purposes, a massive rescue operation for human identity. And if we trace this through the texts, you'll actually notice a massive scriptural shift from the Old Testament to the New Testament. In the Old Testament view, the bearer of the image is simply all humanity. But as we transition into the New Testament, specifically when you read the writings of the Apostle Paul, the bearer becomes explicitly Jesus Christ, the image of the invisible God. The function totally shifts too. It goes from humanity stewarding the earth to Christ acting as the very agent of creation and the head of the new creation. Essentially, Christ becomes the ultimate lens through which all human purpose is understood. Which brings us to Section 3. Creation to incarnation. Let's zoom out and look at the theological before and after moments that really define the whole human condition in this framework. First up, we have creation. This is the moment that bestows upon humanity its unique identity and completely sets it apart from the rest of the natural world. It's the foundational origin story. But then we have the incarnation, which acts as the climactic rescue. By becoming human, the invisible God suddenly becomes visible, bridging this massive chasm that was created by sin. The idea is that God doesn't just abandon his image bearers. No, he actively enters the physical, material world to sanctify and redeem human nature itself.
And that leads us to a truly mind-bending concept developed by the early church fathers. It's known as theosis, which literally means becoming partakers of the divine nature. Wow, right? They didn't see the image of God as just some static label slapped onto humanity way back in the ancient past. Instead, they saw it as a highly dynamic, forward-looking destiny. So it's really not just about where humanity started. It's actually a profound calling toward what humanity is ultimately meant to become through grace.
All right, Section 4, Tracing the Historical Interpretations.
Let's take a quick walk through history and explore how brilliant minds have refined this doctrine over millennia. Starting way back with ancient Jewish midrash, the focus was heavily on intellect and speech, basically our ability to reason like the Creator. Then, moving into the patristic era, early Christian thinkers, like our guy Irenaeus from earlier, they really leaned into theosis and recapitulation. Jump forward to the medieval era, and scholars started tying the image primarily to the rational soul. And finally, when we get to the modern era, theologians like Karl Barth shifted the emphasis to a relational encounter, meaning the focus became heavily about how we actually relate to God and, of course, to each other.
Let's move to and see how this builds by looking specifically at Thomas Aquinas. He had this highly structured medieval scholastic view, and he broke the image of God down into 3 incredibly digestible stages. Stage 1, it is present in all humans at creation. Stage 2, it gets renewed and strengthened through salvation. And Stage 3, it is ultimately perfected in glory. It's such an elegant way to frame the Christian life, really mapping it out as an ongoing, systematic journey of transformation.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 5, the basis for human rights.
Okay, it's time to bring all this high-level theology right down to street level and ask the crucial "so what" question. Like, how does this actually change the real world? Well, the sources highlight some massive, tangible, ethical impacts. First off, it establishes universal, intrinsic worth that is totally independent of a person's wealth, their power, or their utility. Historically speaking, this provided a fiercely powerful theological foundation against slavery. Because if you view every single person as a living statue of God, well, that perspective directly fueled Western abolitionist movements. And today, it continues to deeply frame our contemporary bioethical debates, everything from discussions around abortion all the way to end-of-life care. Now, without taking a stance on those specific modern debates ourselves, we can very clearly see how the doctrine of the Imago Dei provides the fundamental vocabulary and the framework for how our society even debates the inherent value of human life.
Grounding ethics in the Imago Dei provides what you could call a non-arbitrary, absolute foundation for human rights. And this is backed by a really diverse array of scholarly references. It offers a foundation that is completely independent of the shifting sands of political decrees or whatever the current cultural consensus happens to be. Secular philosophies might base human rights on reason or usefulness to society, but this tradition, it bases those rights entirely on the unshakable, intrinsic worth of a person, simply because they reflect the divine. It's a real game changer. Which brings us to this absolutely beautiful summary quote straight from the source material. It says, "This doctrine is ultimately about urging individuals to see the divine in the ordinary." I just love that. The core takeaway here is that our ethics are actually meant to mirror the self-giving love of God. So loving your neighbor isn't just some nice societal rule to keep the peace. It's about fundamentally recognizing and respecting the divine image that is reflected right there in them, literally no matter who they are. So I want to leave you today with this final kind of provocative thought. How does recognizing the divine image actually change the way you view your neighbor? Seriously, think about the people you interact with every single day. Maybe it's someone you strongly disagree with, or even just someone you barely ever notice. If they truly bear this incredible cosmic blueprint, how does that shift your perspective? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep seeking out the structure behind these big ideas, and I will see you next time.